Okay, so I am live here, and we are going to be today, instead of working on Chris Perrin's Mecha, making that SRS, instead I wanted to do a little bit of hacking of World of Dungeons Turbo, which is kind of like a Ghostbusters version of World of Dungeons, but really it's like this transition game in between Blades in the Dark and World of Dungeons. So you can see here, like, you have the three stats, Insight, Prowess, and Resolve, which are also in Blades in the Dark. You can see that you have experience tracks. You can see you have strain, which is similar to stress in Blades. You can see that you take talents, which are similar to what you find on the Blades character sheet, but also are similar to what you could pick in World of Dungeons. Your pack functions basically the same way it does in Blades in the Dark. And then there is gear on hand, which is, this is a different thing. This is kind of more like Torchbearer, pack versus gear on hand. That feels like a kind of a Torchbearer thing to me. Yeah. And your speed is affected by your encumbrance, right? Cool. So let's just take a quick look here at these rules, and then we'll go on to talk a little bit about what we're doing here. I'm on a limited time budget for today, so I'm going to try to keep things breezy here. Okay, so the premise of the game: the magical realm of Kirvax has collided with Earth, shearing the dimensions and creating a mashed-up borderland between our reality and the monster-infested domain of the wizard Kai Shira Kai. You play working-class heroes who explore the twisted break, seeking fame and fortune, but don't stray too long, or the cloud of woe will surely find you. Is this WoDu doing Blades in the Dark? Isn't that like an egg eating a chicken? Well, it's more like Blades in the Dark. What I think this was, yeah, it's kind of like the development process for Blades in the Dark started after World of Dungeons, right? And then in the middle of the Blades in the Dark development process, John Harper was like, I'm going to do Blades in the Dark, but simple. And broke off into doing Breakers. And then finish Blades in the Dark. So they're like divergent evolutionary paths. But they share a ton of DNA. It might be better to think of them as having like the same family tree. They both come out of World of Dungeons. Yeah, so... so one obvious difference from Ghostbusters is you play as working class heroes, whereas... Ghostbusters is like the game celebrating petty bourgeois enterprise. But anyway, leave that aside. We don't really care about the premise that much. So your character creation. So this is where we start. Who were you before you became a breaker? Choose a general background category: civilian, criminal, military, science, or weird. And then write the specifics on the line below. So you will notice that this is very similar to Blades in the Dark. Again, you know, you have like labor, military, blah blah blah. Like there are a number of backgrounds you can choose for your character in Blades in the Dark, just like you can here. Yeah. So for example, you might choose science and write the Department of Energy agent, or maybe you're weird and you were a Kirvaxian death seeker who once fought against Kai Shira Kai's vile legions in the other world. So, I mean, I think that there's a little bit of OSR in here that is not in Blades, right? Where it's like you just like pick a very general thing and then kind of like riff on it. It's not like proceduralized in any strict sense. So that is a little bit more loose, a little bit more World of Dungeons. So the next thing you do is you determine your experience level and assign scores to your attributes. So by default for experience, you start as a Colt over here. This means you've gone on one adventure and you're level 1. Every time you complete an adventure, you fill in a triangle. When you fill the triangles above an experience level, you advance to that level. So say I have 3 experience, then I become a pro. Yes. So the attributes are Insight, Prowess, and Resolve. These are, again, the same as in Blades. It's just Blades breaks these down further into actions, right? But the attributes are the same. Attribute scores range from -1 to +3, so we're not using the Blade-style D6 dice pool system. We're using the Blades in the Dark 2d6 plus a modifier system. With 0 being average, your attributes sum to your character level. So at level 1, they will add up to +1. You might have +1 Insight, 0 Prowess, 0 Resolve, or -1 Insight, +2 Prowess, and 0 Resolve, etc. This is a really nice, like, elegant system. I like that like, your traits sum up to your character level, which is just like you do some really basic arithmetic and you're set. Like, you don't need to look up a table or something. It's just in your head. You can do that. At Colt level, you have 8 HP, and you get 4 HP per level. Again, I like that very simple progression system. That is good stuff. You choose your talent. At Colt level, you have 1 talent, so you can pick from this list of talents here. And there's no classes in this game. Right? You choose a background, and you get a level of proficiency, and then your talents, you're free to choose whatever the hell you want. So I have done a video about why I think classes in World of Dungeons are awesome, and kind of did some class design in that game. However, I also can kind of see how maybe this game was like John Harper like blowing off some of his frustration with not being able to make a classless Blades in the Dark work. So I understand, I sympathize with the idea of making a classless system that is also simple. And we're going to talk probably about whether we want to go classless or classful in this design. Yeah, so you get a talent. It just gives you like a bonus mod. Very simple stuff. Very similar to World of Dungeons. There's less like narrative guarantees or like sophisticated moves than what you see in Blades in the Dark. It's very, very simple. And like Arcane is like, hey, magic powers. There is a little bit more magic description down here, right? But it's basically very simple stuff. You don't get like a 2-page description of how to do Arcane. Then you determine your equipment and speed. So as I talked about, there's basically encumbrance, and it determines your speed level. All right. So rolling the dice. This is standard Apocalypse World shit plus right here you can get a crit, which is in some yeah, narratively you could blend this with Monster of the Week. Absolutely you could. Absolutely. Monster of the Week, I could see it working pretty well. other games that are PBTA and it would blend well with. I think Monster of the Week might be the best one. But it also can definitely be given like a fantasy skin, and you can use it to run some kind of like Darkest Dungeon thing, like some of the early Blades in the Dark mods have done. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, you can crit in this game, which is like some PBTA games, but some of them don't do that. Many of them don't do that. And that is a thing you can do in Blades in the Dark. Alright, so Strain. Breakers have a special resource they can boost their rolls. They can use to boost their rolls called Strain. May sound familiar, it's basically stress. The amount of strain you get is determined by your level. And when you spend a level of strain, you add plus 1d6 to any roll. So you're rolling with advantage. Or sorry, no, you're not rolling with advantage. Or is that right? No, it's not advantage. It's rolling 3d6 instead of 3d6 take the highest. Yeah. So this is pretty similar to pushing yourself in Blades in the Dark, right? And you can only use one strain per roll, similar to how you can only push yourself once in Blades in the Dark. Yeah, it's a very similar game. Damage and healing. And yeah, I mean, I will say it's like, people are talking about like, oh, like, I want to make like a simple version of Blades in the Dark. It's like, well, John Harper already made that game. It's right here. You know? Like, there are things you could definitely do to build on Blades, and I'm kind of thinking about ways I can do that here. But if you're just looking for that happy medium between Blades in the Dark and World of Dungeons, this is already that game. You should start hacking here instead of hacking Blades, right? Like, I feel like the work of subtraction is possibly more difficult than the work of addition. Blades in the light, yeah. This is basically Blades in the gray. Yeah. So yeah, why not start here, right? Look at what Harper did in Blades in the Dark that added on this, and see if there's things you like, rather than taking the huge apparatus of Blades in the Dark and saying, I want to cut that down to a small game. Because most of the hard work of hacking is already done here. There is like a sort of licensing reason why you might want to start with Blades, because this is under a like limited proprietary license, whereas Blades in the Dark, you actually can hack it and there's no licensing problems. But you can still kind of take ideas from here, no problem. And this is effectively a Forged in the Dark game anyway. Yeah. Though it's not in legal sense. So let's continue here. So yeah, unlike Blades, unlike Blades, we have an HP counter. So that's different from Blades, where you have a harm track similar to Fate. Normal harm does 1d6 damage. Weak harm does d3 damage. Really powerful harm does 2d6 damage. So this is really interesting, right? Like, it's converting the harm system directly into an HP value. Really, really interesting. Subtract your armor from the damage taken. Yeah, that's pretty standard. As long as you have hit points, you're fine. When you take damage past your HP, you're in trouble. Make a resolve roll to find out how bad it is. On a miss, you suffer the worst of it. You're out of action. If this was a deadly attack, that means you die. Otherwise, maybe you get you break your leg, get knocked out, etc. If you're killed, you can choose to survive instead by taking a permanent scar. Oh, okay, so that's pretty much like taking trauma in Blades, right? Yeah. Um, and if you mark all 3 scars, that's it. You can't cheat death again. When you take a rest, you get to roll 1d6 for each of your unspent strain and recover that much HP. So yeah, there's a bit of resource management here. If you don't spend so you can either choose to spend strain to improve your roll, or you can bank strain in order to recover more HP. And you can also use a first aid kit to recover HP, in which case you are spending a stock that relies on encumbrance instead of spending your strain. So you can't completely get away scot-free. You're either going to have to carry more gear or spend more strain, or choose to bank strain and then have worse rolls. Or at least worse chances at your rolls. Okay, equipment. Very simple stuff, similar to World of Dungeons. Armor. C4, what does it do? It blows up. There's no specific rules, right? There's some mechanical things, like Flashbang inflicts slow speed, which is a thing that applies also to players. And like, look at this. Weapon. Weapon does d6 damage. Choose close combat or ranged. Like, that's all you need. Like, you know, the equipment, the weapon list is one line, and it just says weapon. There's weapon, and there's special weapon. So, pretty interesting stuff there. Alright, so premise, it's like Ghostbusters with Army of Darkness. Blah, blah, blah. So the important thing here is that this game is designed for short dungeon crawls. So you grab your favorite small dungeon map, and then mash it together into these like shards. So each break is a keystone shard, a large and highly valuable, or within each break is a keystone shard, a large and highly valuable iridescent crystal which pins the dimensions together. If the crystal is destroyed, usually with C4 or somehow removed, the break collapses in spectacular fashion. Imagine Indiana Jones, so like, this is a John Harper game, so Indiana Jones is like the most important reference, right? Always think about Indiana Jones when you are thinking about John Harper games. Running away from the giant boulder, except the giant boulder is a rolling mass of dimension-shearing energy. It's the breaker's job to close the break, for which they receive payment from FEMA. But most breakers make a living by selling the weird artifacts and shard fragments they find during their adventures. So, you know, this is very much like doing a... what do you call those? Like those micro dungeons in Diablo 3 that you do when you get to the end game. That's kind of like what this is like. You run into this instance, and you do this little tiny dungeon, and then you get out and you get some rewards. So this is like a game that could... It's basically like a score, but it's a little bit more oriented towards the dungeon crawling tradition that you see in World of Dungeons, and a little bit less oriented towards sort of like heist fiction. So that's pretty cool because it means that this game can interface with OSR stuff in a better way than Blades in the Dark can, in my opinion. Yeah. So, Let's take a look at using dice rolls. So make a dice roll when the PC does something risky or when they try to avoid a bad outcome. Otherwise, just say what happens. Let it roll. Or let it ride. Sorry. I'm very mixed up. This is roll dice or say yes, right? Roll dice or say yes. The GM doesn't need to roll dice. This is player facing. And we got fortune rolls in this, just like in World of Dungeons. So unlike in Blades in the Dark, we can see that fortune rolls are just a straight d6. So in Blades in the Dark, fortune rolls can be modified by circumstances. That's not the case here. And a montage roll is a different thing. So whenever you want to skip over something, basically this is pretty similar to doing like a group action or doing a fortune roll to elide something in Blades, because this is like a fortune roll that plays with an attribute. Yeah. And use the outcome to establish the PC's position for the next encounter. Sounds a lot like the engagement roll, doesn't it? Yep. Okay. Bonuses and penalties. The GM may assign bonuses and penalties to the player's rolls to reflect unusual circumstances. When a PC has a significant advantage, give them +1 to their roll. When they have a dominant advantage, give them +2. And then it can go down to -1 or -2. This is pretty interesting. I'm skeptical of how well this actually works, because I don't think that PBTA games are actually very good at handling bonuses and penalties. They, like, beyond like a +1 -1 situation. I don't think they have a very like broad bandwidth to play with because of the D6 roll. Which is one reason why I'm kind of on the fence about whether I want to actually use the 2d6 plus a modifier, and I'll get into that later for when I'm talking about how this, like, how I see this becoming a mecha game. Okay, so next, do I prefer roll extra d6 and take higher or lower? Yeah, that, like, I basically think that having some kind of dice pool is good. Like, I think that the decision that John Harper made in Blades to use a d6 dice pool, take the highest lowest, was a good decision. He said how he took this, he basically said that when he originally learned about the 3 potential different outcomes, right? The 7, like, basically when he learned about the 7 to 9 result from Talislanta, you know, Vincent Baker decided to move that into a 2d6 mechanic, and he was kind of like that's okay, but I kind of also like dice pools. And building dice pools, and I kind of feel like there are advantages to both, and I think that for most PBTA games, 2d6 plus a modifier is like a better choice because it's very simple, but I don't know if it's going to be workable for a mecha game where we may be juggling some more modifiers, and there's something very, like, crunchy about mecha games that I wonder if PBTA mechanics can really capture, and that's also why I wonder if, like, that's why there is no good, like, really good mecha game for PBTA. Just a thought. I don't know. We're going to have to think about that more as we go on. So let's look at these situations for modifiers. So when to give a bonus, when to give a malus or a penalty. Follow through. So this is basically a setup action from Blades. Slower enemies. So if like this is relying on this encumbrance system here, which is pretty interesting and like is definitely something different from Blades. This is like something that really plays to that idea of breakers going in, shattering the crystal, and then having to get the hell out. The perfect tool. This is like getting increased effect in Blades, right? Penalties. So bad conditions. Slippery footing, blinding smoke, faster enemies. Again, it's just the inverse. A bad tool, the inverse, and a terrible idea that still might work. So this is like having zero effect in Blades, right? You can still do it, right? You can do it, but you're going to have some issues. You can still push yourself, right? Even if you have a terrible idea, you can still push yourself to get back to a flat roll. And that is just like having zero effect in Blades in the Dark. Okay, so let's continue. Teamwork. You can help a teammate or cover them or take a hit in their place. Or any other kind of teamwork maneuver by taking the appropriate action. So if you are trying to step in for a teammate, basically using the defend action from Blades, then you have to roll and you take -2 for being at a serious disadvantage. Yeah, otherwise you can just substitute your roll for somebody else's. So, for example, the team tries to sneak past a sleeping ogre. Max and Torres make their rolls, but Pickett blows it. So I guess they're all rolling. This isn't like the group action roll in Blades. Each person's rolling here. Torres says she'll cover for Pickett when Pickett starts to slide on some loose rock and make a noise. Torres grabs her and holds her steady. Torres can make a prowess roll to try this, but she'll take -2 to the roll. So I kind of feel like the group action in Blades is a little bit more elegant than this. But the problem would be with using the group action from Blades here is that you only start with 1 strain. So you can't tell the group leader to burn 3 strain because their teammates fucked up the group action. Because they don't have that much strain to burn. You start with a lot more space to mess with this in Blades in the Dark. Alright, the Cloud of Woe. This is a countdown clock. Pretty similar to like in like Bomberman. If you've ever played that, like if you stay too long on an area, the enemy, like the crazy enemy will come and get you. It's very similar to like old arcade games or like Spelunky. And I think Darkest Dungeon does this as well, right? If you stay in a dungeon too long, there's like some kind of big bad that comes after you. I may be getting that wrong, but I don't think this is a thing that we're going to be using at all. But we'll probably be using clocks somehow. You know, they're good and cool. But basically, every time... This is like, you know, in a way similar to the grind in Torchbearer. The GM fills 1 segment every time the breakers take a rest. Okay. we're gonna have to work on this. I don't think this is like a one-to-one thing we can port over, because this is very like specifically designed for the setting that this game has. Magic. You can use either magic or techie, and pretty much you just go with this rule. Like, this is the actual rule. Could you change it to a short 4-part clock, medium 6-part clock, and long 8-part clock? Yeah, sure. Totally. Totally. Yeah, I just don't think it would be the Cloud of Woe thing, right? Like, I don't think that it makes sense in a mecha game to have, like, some kind of terrible countdown clock for every time you rest. That's more of, like, a dungeon crawly trope. As for the arcane, yeah, so this is, like, the actual rule here. The more powerful the effect, the more risky the roll. So, like, I believe this is also a thing Harper talked about in Improbable Interviews. He said, you know, this is kind of a cheap game design thing, but, like, basically give the wizard as much power as they want, but make the risk commensurate to the power they take. Which is really cool, but probably not super relevant to what we're doing. I do think we may be able to work this into a mecha thing in the sense of, like, using, like, an overdrive or, like, an overboost or something like that. Like, it's like, oh yeah, you can push your systems, but there's going to be, like, basically, like, a resistance roll you have to make in order for your mech not to overheat, right? Because that, like, power versus heat dynamic is very much present in many mecha games, going all the way back to BattleTech. The techie talent is more relevant to what we're doing, and uses basically the same thing. So if you're trying to do something very wild and improbable engineering-wise, there's going to be bad consequences if you screw up. Oh yeah, right. So time limits, like in Evangelion, yeah, totally. I could definitely see that. That is also a thing in, like, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some mecha fiction that relies on, like, the limitations of your fuel. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, that could be a definite thing for missions. I've been giving that a lot of thought for, like, in the setting that I was working on yesterday, like, given that the mecha are battery powered, like, how does that interface with the mechanics and the fiction? And a clock could be definitely, like, a good way to do that. Okay, the loot. The amount of loot the PCs are able to haul out of a break is the scoreboard for the game. So similar to World of Dungeons, your loot is like your scoreboard. Every 2 pieces of loot a PC hauls out is like a 1 letter grade worth of performance. So if you get 2 loot, you are basically given a D rank. 4 loot gives you a C rank. 6 loot gives you a B rank, and 8 loot gives you an A rank. I mean, like, this is a sort of vulgar simplification of dungeon design, but, like, I think it's also kind of awesome for what Breakers is trying to do, and, like, Breakers as a game that you could just, like, plug OSR modules into and, like, run a short weekly game. Like, very low prep, don't, like, sweat it too much. This is like what we were doing with Tom when he was running World of Blades. Yeah, that was his hack of Blades in the Dark to make it more like World of Dungeons. So for that kind of play, I think this is fantastic. And I definitely want to move towards like a coin-based system instead of like a, oh, you get like 426 C-bills for doing your mission. No, I want to like just give you like, you know, 4 bars of gold pressed latinum or something. Yeah, I mean, assuming we use breaks at all. Like, I'm not committed to the idea of breaks at all. Like, I just think that the equivalent for a break here could just be doing a mission as a mech pilot, right? But, you know, there is the possibility of doing, like, a mecha version of breakers, which could also be fun. Yeah. Now I'm just getting, like, ideas about doing, like, a 40k version of breakers where you are playing as, like, Grey Knights or something going into the warp. That could be pretty fun, too. Anyway. So... loot can be shards or strange artifacts from the Dark World. Yeah, the Eldar for the win. Yeah. So yeah, it could be usual dungeon treasures, gold coins, or magical items. Any given area of a break site might have loot. The PCs can scrounge to find it. The Keystone's shard that keeps a break open is essentially a huge piece of loot, equivalent in value and weight to about 20 loot. Most breakers just set time C4 charges on it and try to get out of the break before it detonates, but especially daring PCs may be tempted to figure out a way to haul the thing out intact. Hell, driving a 4x4 truck with a winch into a break might be a fun adventure in itself. So this, like, really kind of reminds me of, like, Dungeon of the Endless, if any of you have ever played that, which is, like, this really weird, roguelike RTS dungeon crawler. It's a really interesting game. And finally, we have resting and scrounging. So the PCs can rest during an expedition into the break. When they rest, every PC rolls 1d6 for each unspent strain. As we mentioned before, it recovers that much HP. Then each PC recovers all of their strain. So you first calculate your HP recovery based on your remaining strain, and then you refresh your strain after that. Each PC may also use a first aid kit when resting. Okay. And if you have the medic talent, you can do an additional 1d6 HP, which means that you can spend a talent instead of spending encumbrance. In addition, during a rest period, the PCs may scrounge an area. The PC can scrounge for loot, or they can scrounge for gear. Make an insight roll. On a 12 plus, you find 4 loot, or a couple pieces of gear. On a 10 or 11, you find D3 loot, or a piece of gear you're looking for. And on a 7 to 9, you find D3 loot or a piece of gear, but it's an ordeal. Stuck in wreckage, locked in a treasure chest, obscured by some stupid dungeon puzzle, or whatever. You get the loot if you suffer D6 damage from fatigue and trouble. So this is like a good idea because... it is using HP as something more than just you getting stabbed, right? Like, fatigue also counts as HP. I like that. That is good. That is, like, it's similar to the way harm works in Blades, right? And it's similar to, in theory, it's similar to the way HP is supposed to work in 5e. But in practice... I think that 5e still kind of leans towards the HP is for fighty things trope. Or, like, physical blunt force damage from falling or jumping in a fire or something like that, right? When you rest, you can choose to scrounge first, then heal and recover strain, or vice versa. You might also use the scrounging mechanic to represent some other downtime activity during an adventure, like studying the magic ruins in a temple to learn how to summon a guardian spirit, or using heavy tools and spare parts to fortify a position against a impending monster attack. Feel free to get creative. So this is like the root of like downtime activities, right? And like, so this is basically similar to indulging your vice or doing a recovery roll. It's actually, no, it's more similar to doing a recovery roll. And this is like your downtime activities. So we can definitely make use of this idea of using the scrounging framework to do other cool stuff. Yeah. So there we go. That is World of Dungeons Turbo Breakers. That's the whole game. Similar to World of Dungeons, basically works best when you have other stuff to plug into it. And that is very much what I want to do with this game as well. I want to make it very sort of like plug and play and OSRE. And I want it to be a kind of versatile system that people can just kind of like grab off the shelf and run. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just about out of time here, unfortunately. I would have liked to sorry, not strain. That's this thing over here. I would have liked to stream more, but unfortunately I'm very pressed for time today. But we did get through the game, so that is a good start. A nice refresher for everybody. So things I'm going to think about going forward. I'm definitely going to change the stats. I'm not sure. I know I'm not going to be using these stats, and I won't be using these stats, but I'm not sure if I'm going to use like Lancer's stats or like something from Stars Without Number or something from Mecha, or if I'm going to look at Mech Warrior. I'm not sure, but I don't think these are the stats we're going to use. Other things, like the load limit, I see this probably being useful in some way for defining like a mech weight class. Oh, and okay, so here's a thing that is like a big problem in mecha games is you have the side of play that is pilot play outside of the mech, and then you have the side of play that is on missions in a mech. And in Lancer, at least as of version 1.6, there is a very, very strong divide between these two types of play. It's really similar to Strike, I would say, except this is like a much more like cleanly designed game and focused on what it wants to do. Or also similar to Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, kind of. But there's a very strong divide between the two types of play, where the pilot side of things in Lancer is very like indie game influenced, whereas the mecha side in Lancer is very trad. And in Chris Perrin's Mecha, I would say like both sides kind of function like an indie game with a little bit of trad influence on the battle side. That's something I'm definitely going to look at here because I think they do some cool things in this game. Still want to look at the Mecha system and the new edition of Stars Without Number, but what I'm thinking is like, because this is going to be a very focused game, I think that everything that is not mech play is going to be just like downtime activities. And like fuck it, we're just going to abstract all that shit. Like this is all going to be montaged, right? Like we'll have free play in there, but basically there's going to be very few mechanics for doing pilot stuff. This is going to be a mech This is going to be a mech-ass mech game about mechs on missions. And so we're gonna drop some of the cruft and the complexity of, you know, being able to do the Gundam courtly drama bullshit, as well as the laser sword bullshit. This is a mech-ass mech game about mech-ass, baby. Baby. So, yeah, we'll be talking a lot about leg actuators and gyroscopes. But anyway, these are ideas I have, and that's my alarm, so I'm going to stop streaming now, because I got to run. But thanks for watching, and I will be back with this, more of this, probably either on the weekend or next week. So I will see you then.